Okay, so come to rest on your back. And just taking this moment to connect with the back of the body, again, to tune in with your environment. To move away from what's going around in your thoughts. Just come to the body, the breath. Connecting with the ground through the areas that are now in contact with the floor. Perhaps stepping the feet in and just letting the knees gently sway from side to side to emphasize that contact through the back of the pelvis. And if that turns into a slightly bigger roll, that you can feel this movement up the spine, to the shoulder blades, a roll to the head, just go with that. Let's bring the arms overhead for a moment. Take the pressure slightly higher up the body over the shoulder blades. Lift the head perhaps a little bit away from the floor. Waking up the upper back area. And then come back to center. And take your left ankle on top of your right knee. And draw the knee in towards you, the right knee, threading the hand through the gap here. And holding on to the back of the knee, the back of the thigh. Have that cushion underneath your head or underneath your hips. That's also a nice thing to do. I realize I haven't got my clock, so one moment. And just an easy position, so there's no need to pull the knee really tight in towards the body. Just take a moment here to let this settle. And this may not be the most obvious position to start to feel into the movement into opposite directions away from each other. But bring your focus to the back of your left hip. And it might well be because you're hugging the knee in towards the body, and the pelvis is slightly tilted back. It's quite likely that the left buttock kind of rolls away from the floor slightly. And that's fine. But start to roll the pelvis forward a little bit. So, and with the forward movement, I mean that you're rolling the tailbone a little bit more towards the floor, right? So you would be creating a little bit more of a hollow underneath your lower back, although your lower back probably still's on the floor. I'm just trying to cue you in the right direction here. Let that go again for a moment. And again, roll the pelvis in such a way that you're rolling more towards the tail. In this pose, you can kind of get really focused on, drawing that right knee closer into the body to increase the stretch that you're getting, or moving from side to side as we sometimes do. But in this case, we're actually tugging at the other side of this pose. So we're actually trying to draw the back of the left hip back down towards the floor and creating a subtle stretch from that direction. If you're starting to really tire in your lower back doing this, you're probably working a little bit too hard. So we're just looking for quite a subtle movement at this stage. The shoulders relax. And then we let this go. Just let the left foot come away from the right knee and lead that foot out to the side. Out to the side. And then support the leg from underneath if you like. And again, turn the knee and the toes to point a little bit down towards the floor. So we also get a bit of that spiral action that we did last week here. And as you're reaching a little bit more into the heel in a moment to find a bit more length, also at the same time, again, also draw your left hip back down towards the floor. So you're not reaching into your heel and then your left hip comes further and further away from the floor. You're reaching into the heel and keeping your left hip grounded at the same time. And then bring the leg back in, bring the knee back into next to the other one, and then stretch the leg out along the floor. Reach into the heel and then stretch the left arm alongside your ear. Now here it's really easy to get a sense of that. The opposite ends moving away from each other. If you reach into the hands, reach into the heel. And then let that go. Stack the right ankle on top of the left knee. Thread your hand through the gap. Hold on to the left knee. Take a moment to let that position settle. Perhaps you notice how different this is on this side compared to the other side. And bring your attention to your right hip. And it's almost not even a movement. That's how little it is. But you keep drawing your tail towards the floor. Keep grounding the back of your right hip as much as you can. If that creates a lot of action over your lower back, take a rest in between. And then let your right foot come out to the side. Support it with your right hand. And gradually finding a bit of length over the back of the knee. And as you reach into the heel, at the same time, also keep drawing the right hip down into the ground. So you let the hip and the heel move in opposite directions. Bring the knee back in. And then stretch the leg out along the floor, reaching into the heel. Bringing the right arm up alongside the ear. Reaching into the fingers, reaching into the heel. And then come back in. Hug the knees in towards the body. Take your knees over to the left. Bring the right arm out to the side, both arms out to the side. And with this obvious spiral action that's going on here, also a sense of how that right arm is moving away from the body. And where it's tugging from, perhaps it's sort of across the body that you get a sense of that, the opposite direction in the body, but also perhaps along the breastbone. Perhaps you can create with your breath a kind of a pulling back from that arm of the breastbone. And if you bring your attention to what's happening over the right side of your leg, as the right knee moves away from the center line, notice also, of course, that tugs along the whole length of the stretch, but also attaches to the sacrum and the lower back. And perhaps bring your breath into that lower back area to kind of create a little bit of resistance from there into that pull. So you're kind of adding to that extension, very much from the area close to the lower spine. Come back into center and over to the other side. So our focus could be very much with how far this left hand moves away from the body and how far up you can bring it, how big you can make this movement. But also notice where it is pulling away from. This more in the center line of the body. Where is it pulling away from? And when you establish that sense of where it's pulling away from, over perhaps the top of your chest, the collarbone, the breastbone, can you create almost a little bit of a pull in the opposite direction, even if it's just with your breath? And then do the same thing in the lower half of the body. If it's the knee, the left knee that is moving away from the center line, and the tug that creates over the outside of the left hip, the lower back area. Also there, can you create some space, some pulling back into that area, the lower back area. And then come back into center. And then roll up to sitting. Bring your feet together. And we're going to create a bit of a weeble wobble. Then you're moving into one side. Stay with that for a bit. So you're now leaning into one side and your other sitting bone is lifting away from the ground. Then start to let that sitting bone on the side that's lifting away, let that start to reach down, drop down towards the ground. Lengthen, grow that towards the ground until you come over to the other side, and then hop over to the other side. And do the same thing there. Reaching your sitting bone, dropping it down, releasing it down. And then go with that momentum to the other side. Do that a few more times. See how that works for you. So rather than creating the weeble wobble from the top of the body with the weight of the upper body, look for it by finding more weight, dropping more weight through that side that's lifted away until it relaxes down, and then go with the momentum to the other side. Release. releasing. It's a releasing of the muscles and tissues along that, from the waist downwards. Okay, we'll come back to this. Come to hands and knees. Take a few cat-cow movements. Again, be with your attention with opposite ends. So as you're rounding, bringing the head down and the tail down, perhaps a sense, or just imagine that the crown, the head, and the tail are reaching for each other, or reaching down towards the same point on the ground. And then come the other way. Can you bring an even effort into both opposite ends? Or does one side want to do more than the opposite side? And does it know better how to do that? See if you can copy that sense. If one side is better at it, see if you can translate that to the opposite side of the body. And then come to center. Step your left foot forward. And here, the back leg lengthens away from the body. You don't have to actively push it away from the body, but just notice if you are tending to pull it back in towards the waist. So that's often already enough of a lengthening, just to not pull back. And the back leg and the shoulder moving in opposite directions. And let the elbows come onto your front knee. And then let the right arm come alongside the ear. And also here, reaching the fingertips and the toes away from each other. And growing them away from each other. And then, of course, the center line, the meeting ground. If you think of the tree, the trunk meets the ground, and underneath the ground, it becomes the roots. They become the roots. That meeting ground, that's your waist area. Finding some Sense of lengthening through there. And then bring the hand back down. Just bring the hips back. Move the hands back as far as you can. You come a little bit further down if your front leg permits. Straighten the leg out best you can. And then also here, rather than reaching your heel forward, which would be the obvious thing, which is what you can see, can you from here reach your left sitting bone away further into the room behind you, away from your heel? Let that be your focus. How do you do that? And again, it might just be almost just the idea of it rather than an actual movement. Perhaps there's very little room for maneuver there, and that's okay. Just bringing your attention there and knowing that that's an option here. And then come back out. Step the foot back. And move around a bit, perhaps to release any catches. And then step the right foot forward. And letting the back leg grow backwards. And then bring the elbow onto the knee. And letting the left arm come up alongside the ear. And without really overreaching into it, let it grow, let it evolve the length that you're creating here. Letting the top half and the bottom half of the body grow away from the waist. And then bring the hand back down. Move the hips back. Straighten that front leg. And then whichever position you find here, rather than pushing your knee down or reaching actively into the heel, bring your focus to your sitting bone and start to reach your sitting bone a little bit further back. And then you come back to hands and knees. Tucking the toes and lifting into a downward facing dog. Taking a soft downward facing dog with your arms and your legs, your knees and your elbows a little bit soft. And then, of course, in this position, both the hands and the heels are moving away from the sitting bones. So just focusing on one end of the downward dog at a time, letting the heels and the sitting bones move in opposite directions. And when you feel that's kind of where you are for the moment, as far as it goes for the moment, bring your attention to how you can lift the sitting bones away from your hands and the hands away from your sitting bones. When you tire of the movement or the wrists need a break, give them a whirl. And then when you're ready, come back into it. Come down once more to the knees to have a rest. Even if you can still continue, just take a moment here to readjust. And then we come to the downward dog once more. So which way does that come easier? The hands and the sitting bones moving in opposite directions? Or the heels and the sitting bones moving in opposite directions? Or perhaps it's very similar? Is it possible to do both at the same time? And then walk your hands and feet towards each other. Coming to a forward bend. And then straightening one leg at a time. Same thing here. So just straighten out one leg. So start with the right leg. You're lengthening upwards into the sitting bone. We always do that sense of lengthening upwards of the leg. But this time as you do that,
also, rather than pushing your heel into the ground, you don't have to push into it as such or put any extra weight into it. Just a sense of growing roots through your heels into the ground, a sense of lengthening, even that's just, energetically, so to speak. And at the same time, still that lengthening upwards into the sitting bone. And then do the same thing on the other side. Do you find you're going from one end to the other, reaching into one and then reaching into the other? Is it in any way possible to do both at the same time, or is that too confusing? And then let that go. And then bend the knees, lift the head, come up to standing. Okay. Just step the feet wide and find a way towards a triangle pose. So, and in a way, what we'll do within the triangle pose is bring what we did last week and the principle of this week together, because they work both really nicely in a triangle pose. Again, a new thing to discover in the triangle pose. As always, there's always something new in a triangle pose. So bring your right foot out, roll your right foot out to the side, and sorry, I've got my left leg out. Do your left leg. Left leg out. And your right foot is slightly pigeon-toed. And then we're just going to lean forward and lean slightly to the diagonal. So you're folding forward almost towards the corner of that mat there. And then when you're in a good position, you bring your left hand onto your shin and start to open out into your triangle. Just leave the arm out of it for the moment. It's just to bring our attention to the lower half of the body first of all. A sense of reaching the left heel away from the left sitting bone and the left sitting bone, just ever so slightly, also activating upwards. And start to find a spiraling action through your left leg, an outward rotation throughout your left leg. Right, as if your inner edge of the leg rolls more towards the top of the thigh, that direction. And again, it's almost more of a thought than an actual movement, although there will be a little bit of movement and the tissue will start to work in that direction. At the same time, we continue that spiral through the upper body, turning the upper body out, rotating it outwards to the right. Can you let those two work together? The rotation of the leg in one direction and the rotation of the body in the other direction, like that. It's like a ringing action, and even though I don't like to use that word, but that's the direction. And then we bring the top arm up. And then again, we can let the top arm and the bottom arm, or the top hand, the bottom hand, move in opposite directions. You could even create a sense letting the tail and the crown move in opposite directions too. And come back up to standing. Center the feet. Turn your right leg out. Lean forward. So when you're leaning forward, you probably can't see that on the flatness of the screen. But my upper body, if I'm just leaning forward without actually having twisted the chest open yet, I'm actually a little bit in front of the leg rather than that I'm right over the leg. And then from there, as we start to open out, the upper body will end up above the leg, more or less. And again, finding some length over that front leg, lifting the sitting bone, the right sitting bone, a little bit away from the right heel. Letting the whole leg, like a trunk, letting it rotate slightly outward. And at the same time, letting then the body open out to the side, so it's also rotating away. Can they help each other? That rotation, that slight rotation in the leg, that even the thought of that action, the outward rotation of the whole length of that right leg. How can that help bring the chest further forward? Can bring that rotation in the upper body. And then bring the upper arm. And letting the hands move in opposite directions. Crown and the tail. And come back up to standing. Okay. Staying with the feet wide. Toes are slightly pointing in towards each other. Bring the hands to the top of the thigh. Lifting the chest and folding forward. A couple of blocks would be handy here, or even the edge of a chair if the floor is very much out of the way, especially if you find it difficult to find the length at the backs of the legs here. Have something to higher up to rest your hands on. Otherwise, you just kind of risk pushing too much into the backs of the knees in order to try and do this. So take it gently on that. Now the hands are right below the shoulders. It can be on the tips of the fingers, if you like, or on the palms of your hands. And then just close your eyes, if you haven't already. And bring your attention to the structure here. The scaffolding of this position. And bring your attention to your feet.
the heels and the base of the toes all pressing evenly, even contact with the ground. And growing the heels further into the ground. And at the same time, creating a sense of lifting, growing towards the ceiling of your sitting bones. Then create a similar action through the palms or your fingertips and your shoulders. And I would say with shoulders probably more sort of behind your back, so more the shoulder blade area than the tops of the shoulders. Growing them in opposite directions. The same to the tail and the crown. More difficult to actually feel an action there. But just imagine a sense of lengthening through all of the spine. And can you even out this effort through all these three limbs, if you like? Five limbs. And then let that go. Scissor the feet towards each other. Let the feet be a little bit apart, toes pointing forwards. And take a moment, first of all, just to let your belly rest against your thighs, so that the weight of the body is kind of carried by the thighs. It kind of hangs in the thighs. Then the area around the sitting bones, tissues around the sitting bones can soften a little bit more. So they don't have to carry all the weight. And then that gives you a bit more room to come down to squat. Push the knees out, bring the hands together. And then come down to sitting. Bring the right foot over to the other side of your left leg. So a simple twist here. You hold onto your knee for a moment to find an upright spine. Just for the moment, just let that left leg be relaxed, the outstretched leg be relaxed. And then bring your left arm around the knee. Draw your belly across, coming into a twist. Bring the right hand somewhere behind you, creating
an upright spine. So try not to lean in towards the right side. So you can tell you're doing that if you're getting more of a stretch over the left side of your upper back, for example. So see if you can even out the length of the spine on both sides. And then activate that left leg. With activate, I mean turn the toes to point up, flex the foot a little bit, and straighten the leg right down, out, and press it a little bit against the ground. Again, just slightly, so you'll feel instantly how that kind of grounds the pelvis a bit more firmly into the ground. And can that in itself give you a bit more room to twist or find a bit more length in the spine upwards? So as the pelvis grounds, the left leg grounds, ground gets to grow upwards. And let that go. Come to the other side. Again, just let the leg relax for a moment. It's kind of nice because you can really then pick up how that is different when you then engage the leg. So you bring the right arm around the knee, start to twist to your left, see how that goes. And then once you find your position, then bring the action of that right leg in. See how that is different, how that gives a firmness to your base to create the twist from and to create the length from. And then release. Okay. Now cross your legs and bring your, let me do it this way around. Bring your right foot in front. And then bring your feet really quite far over, so you're not in a, crossing at the ankles. You're more in a, what we call a square pose. So the feet are underneath the opposite leg. If you'd like to support this with some blocks or cushions, that's a good idea. And if you have from this position a bit more room to start to lean forward, then go with that. If not, just stay in an upright position. Try to find a forward tilt to your pelvis. So you're sitting on your sitting bones, not behind your sitting bones. Again, a cushion might help. And also here, you can find the opposite direction. If you're sitting more upright, find the opposite direction, first of all, down through the sitting bones into the ground, and up through the spine into the crown. you're starting to lean forward, and you're creating the tug more at the backs of your legs and into the buttocks around the sitting bones. Then you could experiment with feeling the opposite directions more between your knees and your sitting bones. So you're letting your sitting bones actually grow or walk away from your knees. That also means that you're keeping your spine fairly flat. Bring your breath into that area where you're feeling the strongest sensation. And let the out breath give you a sense of softening. Just be attentive rather than ambitious. Curious. And then walk your hands over to your left. Turning the chest towards your left knee. This is a little bit contradictory to what I would normally say, but what you could do here is to really go to your edge so that that right hip starts to come away from the ground. And then stay with that and start to soften the right hip back down towards the floor. Let that right hip start to grow down towards the floor, releasing it down. Without drawing the upper body back up again. So you stay in that position that you found there and just see if there's room to let that right hip go downwards. Finding more of a stretch because the area that is out of sight that you don't see is growing downwards, is growing away from the center line. And then you can see if you've, once that has settled down a little bit, perhaps there's room to let the upper body come a little bit further forward. And then again, every time you find a stop there, again, not pushing beyond your edge. And then finding a way to release, soften, and let's settle the right hip back down to the ground. Walk your hands back to center. And back up to sitting. And release the legs. And I cross the legs the other way. Again, you might all just want to stay, even if you know you can go down forward. You might just want to start with this upright position and find a sense of length upwards throughout the upper body, the waist up, and letting the sitting bones settle down into the ground. And if you do start to move forward, I don't know if this is works for everybody like this, or if it depends perhaps on the structure of your body. But when I have my hands forward like this, and perhaps you're really far down, you've got your elbows on the ground, but I find now I quite like to let my elbows rest into my knees. Have just a little bit of weight through there. And then from that position, it gives me a little bit of access to still let the spine lengthen upwards, from the waist, letting the spine lengthen upwards and letting the pelvis stay connected to the ground. Kind of helps to keep the spine long and quite flat rather than rounded. Keeping a lightness to, a length to the upper body. Moving in the opposite direction from the lower half of the body. the lower half of the body rather than, going straight down. It's more moving back towards the wall behind. You're continuing the direction that your upper body is making, not curving downwards. Let the shoulders be relaxed. And move your hands over to the right. The upper body turns to the right. And leaning in so far that, the left hip comes away from the ground slightly. And then stop there and let your left hip find its way, grow its way back down to the ground. Use your breath quite literally, quite physically, to create space. If you bring your breath right down into your belly, and your in-breath kind of pushes in towards your pelvis, in towards your thighs, creating expansion in the tissues of the body from the inside out. And our breath always is an invitation to relax, to soften, to let go. And walk back to center again. See what that's like to lean into this position now. And then roll back up to sitting. Let's let the knees move from side to side. Make it a bit bigger if you like. It's a nice way to unwind everything, literally. And then eventually we come to roll down to the ground. So taking the arms out, rounding into the lower back, keeping the weight of the shoulders and the arms reaching forward as a counterweight. Now, you could take a pillow. And for this one, you could actually also use a block, but you could take a pillow, bring it underneath your hips, and let your legs float up into the air. Really let the weight of the pelvis settle down. And let the legs simply float up there. If you want to do a little bit more, you could come into the plow pose. And whenever you're ready, bring your hands behind your back and lifting into a shoulder stand. So stay there. I don't like to talk when I'm in a shoulder stand, so I'm rolling out, but stay there if you want. When you're in the shoulder stand, also there, can you get a sense of the grounding of your shoulders and your arms, the backs of your arms against the ground? And from the waist upwards, a sense of lengthening, a sense of growing into your feet and out through your feet. Allow that weight of the shoulders and the backs of the arms, the back of the head to settle down. Try not to work from there too hard. And if you're resting on the cushion with your legs up into the air, let the belly relax.
And then when you're in a shoulder stand, roll back down. When you have a cushion underneath the hips, take it out from underneath. And then we're going to take this cushion where your chest was, where your upper back was, and then you're going to lie back over it. So your head is on the ground, your pelvis is on the ground, your shoulders probably a little bit lifted away from the ground. So you're creating a lift, a push to your upper back to create a lift in your chest, an open chest. And let the arms rest out to the side. Legs in any position that feels good for your pelvis or for your back, and whether that's with the legs outstretched or the feet stepped in, or even in the butterfly pose with the soles of the feet together and the knees out to the side. And then take a few deeper breaths. Slow, deeper breaths that fill the whole body, that whole star shape of your body, up with air. Hold it for a moment at the top. Just keep your breath topped up for a moment. And then let it go again. We'll do that a few times. And then creating as little movement as you need to, rolling to the side to take your cushion out. And letting your legs reach away and coming to Savasana.
And then deepen the breath a little. And bring some movement back into the body, feet and hands. Reaching into a wake up stretch, if you like, before you roll to your side. Come up to sitting. Just let the eyes be closed. And can you allow here, even in this meditation position, give a sense of grounding through the base of the body and a sense of growing through the top of the body? And if your body was a tree, the meeting place of the crown and the trunk, the part of the tree that we see, and a part of the tree that is underground, would meet sort of at the lower belly. And let the lower belly be that meeting ground, that base. Namaste.